America, land of the free and home of the incarcerated, land of some of the best colleges in the world and some of the worst public education, land of some of the best health care in the world and some of the worst access to it. That's America in 2017, but it wasn't always this way. When America first began, it was just 13 colonies. At the time, the colonies were being taxed by the British, but didn't have any representation in the British Parliament, and so had a revolution. That revolution was led by George Washington. After the war, Washington retired to his home in Virginia, Mount Vernon, thinking that his career was over. He was mistaken. See, at the time, the United States was governed by the Articles of Confederation, which set up a weak federal government that had to pay war debts to countries like France, but it was not allowed to collect taxes from the states. So, it was replaced by the Constitution, which was only passed on the promise that George Washington would become the first president. While he was president, he set many expectations for the future, like serving only 2 terms, relying heavily on advisors, and inspiring confidence in the nation. Washington's term ended in 1797, and he was quickly followed by John Adams. Adams was not the most influential president, but he did have some important achievements. He was the first president to live in the Executive Mansion, which would later be renamed the White House. He also negotiated a peaceful resolution to what could have been a naval war with France. Adams was one of the leaders of the Federalist Party, along with Alexander Hamilton, but because of the constant infighting between the two, the Federalist Party collapsed. So Adams, unlike Washington, was elected for only 1 term instead of 2, which ended in 1801. Next came Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd president. He served 2 terms, beginning in 1801 and ending in 1809. He was a Democratic Republican, a party he founded largely to oppose the Federalists. He wanted a smaller federal government, but also wanted a larger country, and so supported westward expansion by making the Louisiana Purchase, which consisted of 828,000 square miles of land for only $15 million to France. He also sent out Lewis and Clark on their famous expedition to explore the new territory. After Jefferson came James Madison, who became the 4th president of the United States. Madison also served 2 terms, but in his first term there was the War of 1812. Many people don't know much about Madison or the War of 1812, but it was actually super important. Remember how I told you about how Adams prevented a war with France? Well, that was really just a byproduct of an ongoing conflict between France and Great Britain. One thing that both France and Great Britain had in common, however, was that neither of them really took the U.S. very seriously, which led to them attacking U.S. ships. After multiple failed attempts at diplomacy, President Madison was forced to declare what many were calling a second War of Independence. Despite his declaration, the United States was unprepared for war, and from the beginning lost many battles to the British. The British even took the capital, with Madison's wife Dolly escaping with the portrait of George Washington before the British came and pillaged and burned the White House to demoralize the United States. And at Fort McHenry, after a long night of shelling, Francis Scott Key wrote a poem that you might have heard before. After a shocking American victory at New Orleans by Andrew Jackson, who would later become president, An American delegation led by John Quincy Adams, who would also later become president, negotiated the Treaty of Ghent. The treaty ensured that all British troops left the U.S., and the borders were restored to how they were before the war. So despite the war, Madison was elected for a second term, and ushered in what is called the Era of Good Feelings, a time when America was truly unified and had no major combative political parties. Unfortunately, this period gave way to a period of factionalism and party division, but that's a story for another time.